Lott Creative. Sea Glass. Heart. Beauty born from broken pieces, transformed. A novel. By Lott. Inspired by Project Gutenberg Classics. And of Green Gables L.M. Montgomery. The Secret Garden Frances Hodgson Burnett. Jane Eyre Charlotte Bronte. The Blue Castle L.M. Montgomery. Lott Creative Artistrystore.com MMXXVI. Publisher's Note. Published by Reedy Press, LLC P.O. Box 5131, St. Louis, Missouri, 63139. www.reedypress.com. Copyright 2025 Lott. All rights reserved. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are the products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. No part of this work may be reproduced or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic or mechanical, including photocopying, recording, or by any information storage and retrieval system, without prior written permission from the publisher. ISBN, to be assigned. Cover design by Sarah Johnson. Interior formatting by Michael Thomas. Editorial development by Jessica Miller. First edition, April 2025. Printed in the United States of America. Dedication. For those who have felt the full, annihilating weight of heartbreak, and found, somewhere in the rubble, the extraordinary courage to love again. For the dreamers who see the sacred in ordinary places, in a dog's steady eyes, in clay turning under uncertain hands, in sea glass glowing on a winter shore. For every artist who has taken the rawest material of their grief and made something beautiful that did not exist before. And especially for my mother, who understood long before I did that. The most powerful stories are not the ones that entertain us, they are the ones that heal us, quietly, page by page, in the dark. The cure for anything is salt water, sweat, tears, or the sea. Isaac Dinesen. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Leonard Cohen. I am not afraid of storms, for I am learning how to sail my ship. Louisa May Alcott, Little Women. Prologue. A Canvas of Childhood. Ocracoke Island, North Carolina, before the story begins. Below the garden a green field lush with clover sloped down to the hollow where the brook ran. Anne's beauty-loving eyes lingered on it, all, taking everything greedily in. L.M. Montgomery, and of Green Gables, Project Gutenberg. Maya's earliest memory was not of her mother's voice, or of the cottage's warmth, or of any of the small domestic certainties that anchor most childhoods to the world. Her earliest memory was of the sea. She was 4 years old. The tide was going out, dragging back across the hard-packed sand with a sound like hushed applause, and she sat at the waterline with both fists pressed into the wet, feeling the cold shock of it against her palms. Her mother, Sarah, dark-haired and laughing in The way she laughed before the laughing became less frequent, kneeled beside her, holding out a piece of sea glass the color of a shallow lagoon. Not the lime green of new leaves, not the pale gray of oyster shells, but something in between. Something that had started as a shard of something broken and been worked, by patience and salt and time, into a gem. "Look, Maya bird," her mother said. Her voice was very gentle. It was the voice she used for important things. The sea takes what's broken and makes it beautiful. That's what the sea does. Maya took the glass. She turned it over in her palm, studying the way the light moved through it, changed color inside it, made something of it. Then she closed her fist around it and held on. She would not remember, later, why she felt so certain, at 4 years old, with sand under her nails and the Atlantic tearing at the hem of her dress, that she was going to need to remember this. But she did. She held the glass all the way home, pressed against her chest like a small, cold heart, and she did not let go. She grew up on Ocracoke Island the way certain things grow in difficult conditions, slowly, stubbornly, reaching toward light not because anyone told her to but because that is the nature of living things. Her father, Tom, was a fisherman with hands like weathered rope, strong, scarred, capable, and he brought her treasures from the sea the way other fathers bring flowers, a curl of driftwood worn smooth as bone, a horseshoe crab shell still intact, the rusted skeleton of an anchor he helped her turn, one long summer, into a sculpture that still stands in the backyard. "You've got an eye for beauty, kiddo," he told her, the same way he told her other things he believed completely and without needing to understand them. At 7, she won a blue ribbon at the Ocracoke Community Center for a painting of a ghost crab, small and translucent, half visible, caught in the act of becoming invisible. The judge said it showed unusual psychological depth for a child. Maya did not know what psychological depth meant, but she knew what the crab felt like, that sensation of wanting to be seen and wanting to disappear in almost equal measure. She had painted from the inside out. At 10, she trailed her brother Ethan, 5 years older, effortlessly. Brave in the way she aspired to and could not quite reach, through the island's interior marshes, sketching the wild ponies that materialized from the fog like thoughts half-formed. Ethan was her standard for courage, her measuring stick, her North Star. When he left for college 3 years later, she felt the loss like a room going dark. When she was 9, a storm came. Not the ordinary Atlantic storms that rolled through in September and were endured and forgotten. This was the other kind, the kind the island elders spoke about afterward in the specific, quiet voice they reserved for things that had genuinely frightened them. It took out power lines and flattened hedges and drove the sound across Route 12 in sheets. It found a gap in the cottages' defenses and got in, and the water that pooled under Maya's bed ruined 3 sketchbooks she had been keeping since she was 6. She cried for 3 days. Not prettily, ugly crying, the kind that exhausts you, the kind that leaves you spent and hollow and strangely emptied of something you hadn't known you were carrying. Tom watched her grieve and did not try to stop it. When it was done, he took her to his workshop and they built together, over 2 weekends, a cedar chest with brass hinges and a hasp block, and they lined it with the flannel of an old shirt. "We'll weather any storm together," he said. "But your art lives in here now." That chest became Maya's first understanding of a lesson she would spend the next decade being taught in harder and harder classrooms, that loss is real, and loss is survivable, and what you build after the loss can be sturdier than what came before. She was 15 when the story truly began. She was 15, and it was the Pirate Festival, and she had made herself a mermaid costume from materials she'd gathered over 3 months, and she did not yet know that the best and worst year of her life was about to start simultaneously. She did not know. But the sea knew. The sea had always known. It had been waiting, patient as only very old things can be patient, for the story of what she would make from her breaking to begin. Chapter 1. Whispers of the Sea. The Pirate Festival, first sparks. There had been a new, secret self-consciousness in her heart. Something alien had intruded into the old, perfect comradeship. Something that threatened to mar it. L.M. Montgomery, and of the island, Project Gutenberg. The costume took her 4 months and cost her most of her birthday money. And approximately 40 hours of concentrated, contented work. This was how Maya always knew whether she was genuinely excited about a project, by whether she forgot to feel time passing while she worked on it. The mermaid tail was pieced together from 3 bolts of fabric she'd found at the mainland craft store, a base of heavy Duchess satin in seafoam green, overlaid with organza in shifting blue-gray, and then the shells, hundreds of them, the small spiral ones she collected on South Beach walks, each one drilled and sewn by hand in overlapping arcs that caught the light when she moved and broke it into something else entirely. It was her boldest work. She knew it, and the knowledge sat in her chest like a minor chord, sweet and slightly aching. Ocracoke during the Pirate Festival was the island's most theatrical version of itself. By 10 in the morning, Howard Street was impassable, with people in tricorn hats and belted coats, with children waving wooden cutlasses and screaming in the manner of people who are extremely pleased. The salt and cotton candy smell of it, the particular August heat that pressed down off the sound like a warm hand, all of it was familiar to Maya in her bones, had been familiar since before she could remember. But she had never quite felt like this before. Noticed. Like she was, for once, a visible thing rather than a girl who mostly watched. She was sketching at a vendor's table, a quick study of 3 children arguing over a shared hat, when she heard the crowd's collective sound change. Not louder, exactly. More attentive. She looked up. He was juggling swords. Not prop swords, actual swords, or very convincing ones, the blades catching the sunlight in small, disciplined arcs. He was maybe 16, tall in the way that teenage boys are. Sometimes tall before they quite know what to do with it, with a lean quality that was less scrawny than watchful. Hazel eyes that, even at this distance, gave the impression of containing more than they let on. A tricorn hat worn at an angle that managed to look less like costume and more like character. Their eyes met in the specific, charged way that eyes only meet when both people are paying attention at exactly the same moment. He winked. Maya's pencil stopped moving. Later, when the sun had gone orange and the festival was thinning toward its end, she found her way to the pier and sat with her sketchbook open to a half-finished sunset she was trying to solve. The water below the planks was turning colors she had no names for, not gold, not bronze, not the particular liquid amber of the late light off the sound, but something between all three that shifted as she looked at it. Mind if I join you? He had the kind of voice that hadn't decided what it was yet, still moving between registers, cracking occasionally into something unexpected. She had been expecting it and still startled slightly. I'm Maya, she said. Liam. He settled beside her, comfortable in his own body the way Maya privately envied. You're the mermaid girl, right? That's me. She looked at him steadily. She was shy in crowds and had never been shy in conversations, a distinction that had confused more than one person. You're the one who almost dropped a sword on a small child. He laughed genuinely, not performatively. I never drop them. He looked at her sketchbook. May I? She handed it over. He studied the page with a careful attention she hadn't expected, turning it slightly to catch the remaining light. She watched him look at her work and felt, very quietly, as though something was being assessed and found worth the effort. They talked until the fireworks came. Photography and art and the particular quality of light on the sound at different times of day. Liam saw light the way Maya did, through a lens of desire, wanting to catch and keep it. He'd moved here a year ago with his family. He wanted to photograph everything. I want to conquer the world, he said, and the ambition in it was so direct, so uncomplicated, that Maya found herself charmed by it rather than exhausted. I'd like to paint it, she said. Maybe there's a gallery in there somewhere. Your photos. My paintings. We'd be unstoppable. She wrote that down later, in the notebook she kept by her bed, not the sketchbook but the other one, the private one. We'd be unstoppable. She didn't know yet whether she believed it. She knew she wanted to. That night, for the first time in as long as she could remember, she fell asleep easily, her body still, her mind quiet, her hand loosely curled around a feeling she did not yet have the language for. She would learn the language. She would learn it the hard way. Chapter 2. A Love in Bloom. The months that followed. She walked slowly, enjoying the sweetness of wood and field and the starry summer twilight, and thinking soberly. L.M. Montgomery, and of Avonlea, Project Gutenberg. The months that followed were the best of Maya's life. She knew this. Even while they were happening, which is rarer than people acknowledge. That simultaneous experience of the present and of its own future. Memory, like seeing a painting and already missing it. They were inseparable in the specific, organic way of two people who discover in each other a climate they can breathe in. Monday afternoons. At the Salty Siren, sharing a sundae neither of them could finish. Arguing about whether salt caramel was better warm or cold. Saturday. Mornings hunting for sea glass on South Beach with the methodical enthusiasm of collectors, comparing finds, debating provenance. Late evenings on the dunes when the stars came out close enough to count, and Liam would lie back on the sand and name them, not the real names but the ones he made up, a private cosmology, and Maya would write them in her notebook and make them real. He photographed her sketching. She painted versions of his photographs. They were learning each other's languages, finding the place where their separate ways of seeing the world overlapped and made a third thing neither of them could have made alone. Under his attention, something in Maya opened. She had always felt herself to be a person who existed most fully when alone, or rather, she had assumed this about herself because it had always been true. Now, she discovered it wasn't an essential truth, but a circumstantial one. She had simply never before been seen by someone who looked the way Liam looked. Carefully. Without wanting her to be other than what she was. Her sketches grew bolder. Her color choices became less cautious. She painted a series of studies of the lighthouse at different hours, dawn, noon, the blue hour before dark, and when she showed them to him, he was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You should submit these somewhere." Not kindly. Matter-of-factly, the way you say something you consider obvious. She submitted them. One was accepted into the Regional Youth Arts Show. Their first kiss came on a Thursday, under the big live oak at the edge of Springer's Point where the moss hung in curtains and filtered the afternoon light. It was clumsy in the way first kisses always are, a question asked before either person is quite ready for the answer, and then it was not clumsy at all. "You're my everything," he whispered, and she believed him. She believed him completely. This is worth stating plainly, because later she would be tempted to rewrite this time, to insert doubt, to find in retrospect the signs she should have seen. There were no signs she could have seen. She was 15 years old and she loved him honestly, with her whole character, and the love was not naive. It was simply trusting. There is a difference. The cracks, when they came quietly. Late texts unanswered. Cancelled plans rationalized. The particular quality of a smile that reaches only as far as it intends and no further. Maya noticed. She filed each instance away in the careful way she filed everything, in the private record she kept of all things that didn't quite add up. She did not speak of it, because speaking of it would have made it real, and she was not ready for it to be real. She was 15. She was still learning the difference between faith and willful blindness, and the lesson, when it came, would cost her more than she had. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Spring. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre, Project Gutenberg. Spring came to Ocracoke the way it always did, not announcing itself, but simply arriving, a gradual warming, the yellow jessamine opening on its vines, the ponies on the north end of the island moving in smaller, tighter groups as the mosquitoes hadn't yet come to drive them to the shelter of the dunes. Maya registered none of it. She was watching her phone. This was new. She had never been a person who watched her phone, had, in fact, been occasionally chided by friends for being insufficiently attached to it. Now she understood. The phone was not a phone anymore. It was a window that either showed her something or didn't, and the showing or not showing had begun to feel like the difference between a world with color in it and a world without. Liam's photography was taking him away more. Mainland trips, he said. Good light on the ferry crossing, he said. Work, he said, in the specific, vague way that forecloses questions without answering them. She planned a surprise. Blueberry pie, his favorite, which she had learned by accident and filed away with the other things she'd learned about him, building a portrait of a person the way she built a painting, layer by layer. She made the pie from scratch, gathered a blanket, texted him to meet her at the beach at sunset. He didn't reply. She sat on the sand until the light was gone, the pie beside her cooling into something she no longer wanted. The waves continued without any particular interest in her difficulty. The stars came out. When he finally called, his voice carried the texture of apology without the substance of it. Sorry, got caught up. Rain check? Sure, she said. It was the word she used most that spring. Sure. Fine. Of course. The vocabulary of accommodation, of smoothing over, of choosing peace over honesty in the specific way that seems, at the time, like generosity and reveals itself later as erasure. The rumors reached her on a Tuesday, via Olivia, who delivered the information with the careful precision of someone performing surgery. They'd rather not be performing. Liam. Jess Harper. Seen together. Twice, in the parking lot of the Mainland Mall. The way they stood. It's probably nothing, Olivia said. Maya looked at her for a moment. Olivia was her oldest friend. They had been friends since the 2nd grade, since a shared art project involving unfortunate amounts of glitter, since before either of them had the language for what friendship was. Olivia did not say things she didn't believe. Yeah, Maya said. Probably. She went home and painted until midnight. Blues, primarily. She worked from instinct rather than intention, which was not her usual method, and when she finally stepped back and looked at what she'd done, she found she couldn't quite read it, a seascape that was something else as well. That was also an interior, a self-portrait of a feeling she hadn't named yet. She left it on the easel and went to bed and did not sleep. Chapter 4. The Betrayal Revealed. A warm May evening. No net ensnares me. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre, Project Gutenberg. The message arrived at 5:47 in the afternoon. Maya was sitting at their usual table at the Salty Siren, her sketchbook open to a study of the water outside the window, when Liam's phone, which he'd left on the table when he went to the restroom, lit up with a notification. She was not looking at it. She was drawing the way the late light fell across the harbor in long, declining bars. Then she saw the name. Jess. She did not pick up the phone. She did not need to. The preview was sufficient. 4 words and an emoji that turned the world wide around the edges. She was very still for a long moment, the way she was still when she was looking at something she was trying to understand completely before she reacted to it. The noise of the cafe continued around her. The water outside continued in its long afternoon movement. Her sketchbook was open to a half-finished drawing of light. When Liam came back to the table, he read her face immediately. That was one of the things she had loved about him, that he could read her. And his own face did something complicated. Maya. She placed his phone carefully on the table between them, face up. He looked at it. The silence stretched. How long, she said. Her voice was steady in the way that costs something. She was aware of other people nearby, of the cafe's ambient noise, of all the ways this moment would have been easier somewhere private. She did not move. Maya, it's not. Please don't tell me it's not what I think it is, she said. I know what I think it is. I would like you to tell me how long. He told her. It had been 2 months. The trips to the mainland. The late edited shoots. The rain checks. She listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She was 15 years old and her first love was explaining to her, in the careful, halting language of someone who has rehearsed this and found no version that works, why he had done what he did. She noted, with the precise, observational part of her mind that she could apparently not turn off. Even now, that he seemed genuinely sorry. That this did not help. I think you should go, she said, when he was finished. Maya, please. Liam. She looked at him directly. She had his hazel eyes in her memory. Already, had been drawing them from memory for months, knew the exact color and quality of them. Please go. He went. She sat alone at the table for a long time. She did not cry, not yet. That would come later, in the privacy of her room, but sat with the wreckage of the afternoon the way you sit with something that has broken, cataloging the damage before you decide what to do with it. Then she picked up her pencil and finished the drawing of the light on the water, because she needed to do something with her hands, and because the light was still there, and still worth drawing, and these things were true regardless of anything else. Chapter 5. Shattered Pieces. The weeks after. She had looked on so many unlovely places in her life, poor child. L.M. Montgomery, and of Green Gables, Project Gutenberg. There is a particular quality to grief that no one adequately describes in advance. It is not the dramatic thing, not the heaving sobs, not the operatic despair, not the version that makes good scenes in films. It is the domestic thing. The specific moments. The way you reach for your phone before you remember. The way you plan to tell someone something funny and then remember that the someone is gone, and the joke dies in your hands before you can give it to anyone. For Maya, it was the canvas. She had painted almost daily since she was 7. The habit was so fundamental to her sense of herself that she had never paused to examine it, the way you do not examine breathing. She was a painter. The canvas was where she put things she couldn't say, worked through things she couldn't resolve, found the shape of things she didn't yet understand. It was not a hobby. It was a function. Now the canvas was impossible. She would stand before it with a brush in her hand and find nothing, a blankness that was somehow worse than the pain, because the pain at least had a texture, and this was just absence. Her hands had forgotten what to do. Her eye had gone unreliable, seeing not what was in front of her but only what was not there, the gallery they'd planned, the work they were going to make together, the version of herself that had been becoming, steadily and with growing confidence, a real artist. She withdrew. This was the word her mother used, later, trying to describe those weeks to the school counselor, and it was accurate in the clinical sense and completely inadequate in every other sense. She did not withdraw. She collapsed inward, the way a structure collapses when its central support is removed, not into rubble, but into a smaller, denser version of itself. She was present in her body. She went to school. She ate approximately enough. She answered questions with the correct words. But she was not there. She had retreated to some interior place that was very quiet and very small and required nothing of her. The panic attacks came at night, first, and then during the day. She would be eating lunch, or sitting through history class, or helping her father haul rope from the truck, and suddenly the world would tilt a day. Specific, terrible angle and her heart would begin its percussion, her breath becoming something she had to think about rather than simply do. She learned to count things, the number of ceiling tiles, the number of panes in a window, the number of sounds she could distinguish in the ambient noise around her, and this sometimes helped and sometimes didn't. Her grades slipped with the quiet, gradual, unalarming pace of tides going out. Teachers noticed. Friends noticed. Olivia came by 3 times. In the second week Maya spoke to her through the door, and on the 3rd visit Olivia simply sat outside the door and talked, not about Liam, not about what had happened, but about the things she was watching out the window, the things she was reading, the ordinary broadcast of a world that was still going on out there, and this, oddly, helped more than anything that had been offered directly. Liam moved to the mainland. She heard this from 3 different people before she stopped counting. Ocracoke was a small island. News moved the way weather moved, covering everything. It should have helped that he was gone. It didn't. His absence was just his presence with the comfort removed. But seasons change on the Outer Banks in ways that are not subtle. The temperature, the light, the salt weight in the air, the way the sea shifts its mood from week to week like a person who has a great deal on their mind. And Maya, despite herself, was still alive in all of it. Still noticing. Still reaching, despite everything, for her sketchbook. In unguarded moments, still finding herself arrested by the way a dead vine traced the side of a building, still loving the world's visual insistence on its own complexity and beauty. She was broken. But she was still herself. This was, she would later understand, the essential thing. Chapter 6. A Family's Embrace. The kitchen table. We'll weather any storm together. See Glass Heart, Origin. The conversation happened on a Wednesday, which is not a day that announces itself in advance as significant. They were at dinner, which they still ate together every night. Regardless of what else was happening, this was one of the unspoken rules of the Calloway household, as inviolable as the principle that you batten down the hatches before a storm and check on your neighbors. After Tom had made chowder, Sarah had made cornbread. Maya was moving the chowder around her bowl with the spoon in the specific way that means you are performing the act of eating while not actually eating. Maya. Her mother's voice was quiet. Not interrogating. Simply naming. Maya looked up. The thing about her parents, the thing she had taken for granted until that evening, was that they were genuinely paying attention. Not performing parental concern, not following a script, but actually looking at her the way her father looked at the water before a fishing trip, reading what was there. She saw this now in both their faces, the worry that was not alarm but something steadier and more serious. The kind of worry that has been sitting with itself for a while, waiting for the right moment. She put down her spoon. It came out in pieces, the way things always come out when you've been holding them too long, not in a coherent narrative but in fragments. Evidence, the texture of what had happened rather than the shape of it. Liam. The phone. The careful way she'd listened while he explained. The 2 months. The rain checks. The blank canvas. Tom set down his fork. He listened in the way he always listened. Without interrupting, with his whole body oriented toward her like a compass pointing at the thing it is built to point at. His jaw was very tight. Sarah moved her chair around the table and sat beside her. She did not say anything for a moment, just put her arm around Maya's shoulders. And Maya, who had been maintaining her posture with concentrated effort for 3 weeks, felt something release. She cried properly, then, not the controlled, private crying of her room but the full, graceless, childlike grief of being held by someone who loves you without condition. When it had run its course, which took longer than Maya expected, Sarah said, "I had a heartbreak when I was 17. I thought I would not survive it. I was incorrect." Maya looked at her. She had never heard this before. "Marcus Chen," Sarah said. "Summer between junior and senior year. He chose the mainland, and I chose to come back here, and we both thought it was the end of the world. It wasn't. It was the beginning of several other things." A pause. "I met your father, eventually, through those other things." Tom made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Eventually," he said. "I had to work for it." "You did." Maya looked between them, these two people who had built something that had held for 20 years, who had chosen each other daily in the particular, unremarkable, sturdy way that becomes, over time, its own kind of epic, and felt the future, for the first time in weeks, as a space rather than a wall. Not open, not certain, not anything she could name yet. Just space. Something in which things could happen that had not yet happened. "What do I do now?" she asked. Tom answered before Sarah could. "Day by day, kiddo. You lean on us when it's too much. And you don't stop painting." She nodded. She did not feel better, exactly, the wound was still entirely what it was, but she felt less alone inside it, which is a different thing and, in that particular moment, the more necessary one. Chapter 7. The Counselor's Light. Mrs. Thompson's office. There is no difficulty that enough love will not conquer, no disease that enough love will not heal. Emmett Fox, adapted. Mrs. Thompson's office smelled of cedar and strong coffee and old books, and was the most deliberately calming room Maya had ever sat in. This was clearly intentional. The lighting was warm rather than institutional, 2 lamps doing the work that the fluorescence in the hallway did badly. The chairs were real chairs, not the molded plastic variety. On the walls were pieces of student art, not displayed with labels just hung, given space to be seen. Maya recognized a pastel seascape in the lower left corner that she'd done in 9th grade, before. Any of this, and its presence in this room felt like something she didn't have the right name for yet. "Tell me what's been happening," Mrs. Thompson said. Not as a question. As an invitation, which is different. Maya told her. She was surprised to find that she could be relatively concise about it: the festival, the months of happiness, the slow erosion, the phone, the conversation at the cafe. Said plainly, it occupied less space than she'd expected. It had felt enormous inside her. Immense, geological, the kind of thing that rearranges your internal landscape permanently. Said plainly to another person, it was a story. A painful one, but a story. Containable. "It was my first love," she said, at the end. "I feel incredibly stupid." "Why?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was genuinely curious. Not challenging. Actually curious. Maya opened her mouth and found she didn't have a ready answer. She had expected the counselor to reassure her that she wasn't stupid, and the absence of that reassurance stopped her short. She thought about it. "Because I didn't see it coming." "Should you have?" "Maybe." There were signs. There were things you noticed and chose not to foreground because you were 15 and in love, and those two things, working together, make it very difficult to give negative information equal weight. Mrs. Thompson looked at her steadily. "That's not stupidity. That's a developmental stage that every intelligent person goes through, and the only way out is through." They met weekly. Over the following months, Mrs. Thompson gave Maya 3 things she had not known she needed. The first was permission to be as badly hurt as she actually was. Maya had been telling herself, in the secret internal conversation she'd been having since the cafe, that she was overreacting. That it was just a high school relationship, that she should be further along in recovering than she was, that the size of her grief was embarrassing evidence of some fundamental inadequacy. Mrs. Thompson disposed of this with calm efficiency. Grief is sized according to the importance of what was lost, not according to any external standard of appropriate proportionality. The second was breathing. Literally, she taught Maya a specific, systematic breathing practice for panic attacks that worked on the body directly, bypassing the mind's tendency to catastrophize. Maya, who was skeptical of this on principle, tried it once in a genuine moment of panic, sitting in the school bathroom, the walls doing their particular tilting thing, and was embarrassed by how well it worked. The third was art therapy. Not painting, specifically, though they came back to painting, but the principle that the creative act was not an escape from feeling but a way of metabolizing it. Of taking something formless and making it into something with a shape. The dark, jagged first pieces that emerged from this practice were not beautiful. They were honest, which was more valuable. And then, by degrees, as months passed and the jagged lines softened and colors began to infiltrate the dark, something else began to emerge. Something that was recognizably Maya's eye, Maya's hand, but reaching differently. Deeper. With more at stake. Your pain is in your work now, Mrs. Thompson told her, in the early spring. Not because you put it there consciously. Because you went through it rather than around it. That's where all the best work comes from. Maya looked at the painting she'd just finished, a study of tide pools. The surface reflecting sky, everything underwater simultaneously visible. And distorted, and thought, yes. Yes, she supposed it was. Chapter 8. The Pottery Wheel's Whisper. Community Center. Clay is forgiving. It doesn't demand perfection, it asks for patience. See Glass Heart. Olivia had the specific, cheerful stubbornness of someone who has decided to save you and simply will not be discouraged. Pottery, she said. Tuesday evenings. Community Center. Non-negotiable. I don't do pottery, Maya said. That is the point. The studio was small and smelled of wet earth and the particular mineral damp of clay, a smell that, Maya would later think, she should have recognized as the smell of making things, of material being coaxed toward form. The other students were a mix, two older women with the comfortable ease of people who have been coming to this class for years. A retired teacher named Harold who was learning pottery because his wife had taken it up before she died and he wanted to understand something she had loved, 3 teenagers who were there for various other reasons and mostly looked at their phones between attempts. The instructor, a woman who introduced herself simply as Rosa, with clay on her hands and a quality of unhurried attention that Maya associated with people who are very good at what they do, said nothing about Maya's obvious hesitation. She simply gestured toward an empty wheel, set a lump of gray clay on the bat, and said, "Feel it first. Before you try to do anything with it. Just feel it." Maya pressed her palms against the clay. It was cold and heavier than expected, with a density that resisted. She pressed harder. It gave. Slightly, not in defeat, but as though acknowledging the contact. She set the wheel going. The clay wobbled. She overcorrected. The wobble became a distortion. She pressed wrong and the whole thing collapsed into something that looked like an abstract self-portrait of frustration. She felt her face go hot. Again, Rosa said quietly, behind her. She reset the clay with practiced efficiency. Don't try to make it what you want. Try to listen to what it wants to be. This was, Maya thought, terrible pottery advice and possibly excellent life advice. She tried again. And again. On the 4th attempt, she closed her eyes. A reflex, something she did sometimes when she was trying to really see something, which she'd always known was paradoxical, and the clay under her closed-eyed hands became something not what she intended. A bowl with one side higher than the other, a rim that wavered like a tide line, a thing that was imperfect in ways that were entirely specific and somehow expressive rather than merely wrong. "Oh," she said, out loud. Olivia, at the adjacent wheel, grinned. "There she is." Rosa looked at the bowl. "Keep it," she said. "First attempts belong to you. They know things about you that your later work won't." As they walked home in the late evening, the harbor lights doubling in the dark water, Maya held the bowl, still unfired, still damp, still raw, in both hands and thought about what Rosa had said. "First attempts belong to you. They know things about you." She thought about the first painting she had ever done, truly done, not a class exercise but a real attempt at saying something, which was the ghost crab at 7 years old, the creature caught in the act of becoming invisible. She had been drawing from the inside out then, and she had just done it again with her hands in cold clay, and she was still the same person who had knelt on the beach at 4 years old with her fist around a piece of sea glass, understanding, without words, what transformation meant. She was still that person. She had been that person all along. She had only temporarily forgotten. Chapter 9. Gus, the Sea Dog's Secret. The Animal Shelter. Animals are such agreeable friends, they ask no questions, they pass no criticisms. George Eliot, Mr. Gilfil's Love Story, Project Gutenberg. She almost didn't go. Mrs. Thompson had suggested it in the way she suggested things, not as instructions but as possibilities worth considering, and Maya had nodded and meant it and then not done it for 3 weeks. Volunteering at the shelter seemed like the kind of thing that would require more of her than she currently had to give, and she had been protecting her resources with some care. But she went, on a Thursday in late October, because she was running out of reasons not to, and because Olivia's look of patient, ongoing concern had begun to feel heavier than the alternative. Gus was in the 3rd kennel on the left, and she almost walked past him. He was small for a terrier, a wiry, sand-colored thing with oversized ears that he hadn't grown into yet and a coat that was actively attempting several different textures at once. He was pressed into the back corner of his kennel with the specific, careful stillness of an animal that has learned to be small and quiet as a survival strategy. His eyes, when she stopped in front of the kennel, were a warm, complicated brown, and they found her face with the precision of something that has been doing very careful assessments for a long time. She kneeled down. She did not approach the gate. She simply made herself small and available and let the silence do what silence sometimes does. After a long moment, genuinely long, she counted her breaths without meaning to. He stood up, walked toward her, pressed his nose against the wire and sniffed her hand. She felt the cold touch of it all the way up her arm. After that, she came every day. She brought him things, small pieces of cheese from the kitchen, a squeaky octopus she found at the thrift store, a travel-worn tennis ball that had been someone's dog's once and still carried the ghost of that relationship in its chewed surface. She sat by his kennel and talked to him, which she knew was odd and didn't care about. She told him about the bowl she'd made in pottery class, about the tide pool painting she was working on, about the ghost crab at 7 years old, about the piece of sea glass her mother had given her, that she still had, somewhere, in the cedar chest. He listened with the full-body attention that dogs give to language they cannot understand but recognize as addressed to them. His ears moved. His tail, by degrees, increased in confidence. She brought him out to the beach behind the shelter on a Saturday in November, cold, the wind off the water sharp with the salt smell of something deeper than the harbor. He bolted immediately, which she had expected, chasing a gull with the focused joy of an animal who has never caught a gull and sees no reason not to try. She laughed, actually laughed, a sound that startled her slightly by its presence. He found the box. She would not have called it magical afterward. In the retelling, she was careful about the word magical, because she believed that the ordinary world was already extraordinary enough that reaching for a separate category was usually unnecessary and sometimes dishonest. But she would say, Gus dug, with urgent intentionality, at a spot near a pile of driftwood that she would not have looked at twice, and what came up was a tarnished tin box the size of a hardcover book, its lid stuck with salt and years. Inside, a compass whose needle did not point north, and a carved wooden mermaid no larger than her palm, with a tail inlaid in tiny chips of sea glass, cobalt, amber, emerald, arranged in overlapping scales. Maya sat in the cold sand for a long time, turning the mermaid over in her hands. She was not thinking about Liam. She was not thinking about the counselor, or the pottery class, or the tide pool painting. She was thinking, this is beautiful, and it came from the ground, and the sea made its materials from broken glass, and there is a story in this object that I don't know yet. Gus sat beside her, his warm weight against her thigh, watching the water with the alert, patient attention of an animal who understands about waiting. She scratched his ears. Good dog, she said. Very, very good dog. He thumped his tail once, definitively, against the sand. Chapter 10. Carelia's Tale. The Northern Shore. There is something at the bottom of every new human thought, every thought of genius, or even every earnest thought that springs up in any brain, which can never be communicated to others, even if one were to write volumes about it. Fyodor Dostoevsky, The Idiot, Project Gutenberg. The compass needle did not point north. Over the following week, Maya established this definitively. She tried it indoors, outdoors, away from metal, in the middle of an empty field, and it did not behave according to the physics she understood. It behaved as though it were pointing toward something that moved. Something with intention. She told no one except Gus, who continued to find this information unremarkable. The northern shore of Ocracoke was the island's quietest edge, wild sea. Oats and wind-bent cedar and the particular large, still quality of a landscape that has been doing what it does for so long that human presence feels recent and provisional. Maya walked there on a Saturday morning in November, Gus beside her, the compass in her coat pocket, where she could feel it working against her palm. The cove was almost invisible from the path. You had to know to look, or to be led, which amounted to the same thing. The woman sitting on the moss-draped rock at the water's edge was perhaps 60, perhaps older. There was a quality to her stillness that was difficult to age, that could have belonged to someone much older. Then she appeared. Her hair was the dark silver of pewter, worn loose. She wore an old coat and looked out at the Sound with the particular expression of someone who is not waiting but simply being, which is a different posture entirely. She turned when Maya approached, as though she'd known she was coming. "Maya Calloway," she said. Not a question. Maya stopped. "How do you know my name?" "Your grandmother brought you to this cove when you were 2, the woman said. She asked me to watch out for you, when the time came. I've been watching." She looked at the compass in Maya's hand. Maya had taken it out without quite deciding to. "It led you here." Her name was Carousel. She was not, she said, precisely what the island's stories had made her. She was not a mermaid, not supernatural in any specific sense, but she was old enough and had watched the island closely enough that the distinction perhaps didn't matter. She was the island's memory, the keeper of certain things that didn't fit anywhere else. The pearl she described was real. Maya touched it, felt the specific warmth of something that stores heat differently than stone, but its significance was not what the stories said. It was not magic, exactly. It was more like a concentrating mechanism, a focal point for the island's collective grief and forgiveness. It had been held by a man named Silas Merrick for 30 years, and it had gone dark under his keeping, not because he was wicked but because grief, held without release, turns eventually into anger, and anger does not radiate light. "He needs to give it back," Carousel said. "Not to me. To the island. To the people he's been keeping it from. But he won't give it to anyone who doesn't understand what it cost him to hold it this long." Maya turned the carved mermaid over in her hands, the one from Gus's box, with its sea glass scales. "Why me?" Carousel looked at her with the frank, measuring attention of someone who has been doing accurate assessments for a long time. "Because you've been broken this year, and you haven't let it make you hard. That's rarer than you know." The path to the Whispering Caves was real and physically demanding in the way that real things are demanding, not magically treacherous but genuinely difficult, through bramble and over slick rock and across a swollen creek where Maya fell once, going into her knee in cold water, and got up and kept going. Gus was superb throughout, entirely committed to the enterprise, occasionally pausing to look back at her with an expression of professional encouragement. She was frightened, at points. She was also, she noticed, something else, purposeful. She had not felt purposeful in months. The sensation was physical, a steadiness in her chest, a quality of orientation, and she catalogued it carefully as she walked, the way she catalogued everything, wanting to remember what it felt like so she could find her way back to it. Chapter 11. The Pearl's Radiance. The Whispering Caves. Nothing is so strong as gentleness, nothing so gentle as real strength. St. Francis, Delaware Sales. The caves were behind a waterfall. She had to walk through the edge of the falling water to reach them, which she did with her eyes closed and her breath held, the cold shock of it complete and absolute and, once past, clarifying. She emerged into a space where the walls glowed with bioluminescent moss, the light sourceless and self-contained, the kind of light that makes everything it touches look possible. The sprites were real. Or rather, the lights that moved through the cave were real, and if you watched them for long enough without deciding in advance what they were, they resolved into something that could fairly be called sprites, small, quick, with a quality of intelligence that was not human but not its absence either. They wanted to ask her things. She answered them as honestly as she could, which turned out to be the correct approach. Silas Merrick was also real, and was not monstrous. He was a broad, weathered man who had been sitting in this cave for what appeared to be a very long time, and his anger, which was real and present and manifested in the room as something almost atmospheric, was the kind of anger that is old grief in a new coat. His wife had died. His family had scattered. He had believed himself to be protecting the island by holding the pearl, and the belief had hollowed him from the inside in the specific way that beliefs do when they serve the person holding them better than they serve the stated purpose. Maya looked at him for a moment, this big, furious, exhausted man with 30 years of grief in him, and felt something she had not expected to feel, recognition. "I know what it's like," she said, "to hold something so tightly because you're afraid that if you let go, you'll have nothing left of what you lost." He stared at her. He had, she thought, been expecting an argument, or a demand, or some form of combat. He was not prepared for someone to sit down across from him, carefully, and simply say that they understood. She talked to him for a long time. Not about the island, not about the pearl, not about what he needed to do. She talked about her grandmother, who had known Carousel. She talked about the cedar chest her father had built. She talked about the bowl she'd made in pottery class, lopsided, imperfect, more honest than beautiful. She talked about Gus finding the box on the beach, the sea glass mermaid, the compass that pointed toward things that needed to be found. At some point, Silas began to talk too. It came out slowly at first, in isolated fragments, then with more continuity, the way grief comes when you finally give it permission. His wife. The years before and after. The way the island had felt different without her, as though the light itself had changed quality. It does change, Maya said. I think it stays changed. I don't think you get back to before. But I don't think that means, she paused, reaching for the right words the way she reached for the right color. Feeling for what was accurate, I don't think that means there's nothing good on the other side of the change. Silas looked at her for a long time. Then he opened his hand. The pearl sat in his palm. It was small, smaller than she'd expected. And it was not dark. It was not bright either, not the way Carousel had described it when it was fully itself. But it was warm. She could feel the warmth from where she sat. She did not take it. She watched as he walked to the cave's entrance. Himself, stepped through the waterfall without hesitation despite his age, and held it out toward the sky and the island beyond. The light that spread from it was quiet and specific. Not a transformation. An addition. Something restored to a baseline that had been missing, a frequency returned to a system that had been running without it, compensating, for 30 years. She stood beside him in the waterfall's cold spray and watched the island receive it, and felt, for the first time since the cafe on that May evening, something uncomplicated. Something clear. Epilogue. A canvas of new beginnings. Years later. She was no longer the same and who had driven, wondering and ecstatic, over the Avonlea hills on the first day of her teaching. Life had grown larger for her, horizons had widened, the future beckoned with new, strange appeal. L.M. Montgomery, and of the island, Project Gutenberg. The gallery is called the Croatian Canvas, which is a name that requires explaining to visitors and no explanation at all to the people of Okrakok. Maya is 34 years old now, and she has salt in her dark hair that she does not try to remove, and she knows things about color and light and the nature of transformation that she did not know at 15. Some of these things she learned through her work, which takes up most of her mornings and is still, every morning, the thing she looks forward to most about being awake. Some she learned through the ordinary accumulation of a life, through friendship, through loss of different kinds than the first kind, through the discovery that love is not a single event but a practice you return to daily, with varying degrees of difficulty and grace. Carousel manages the gallery's curatorial side with a steady, unhurried competence that baffles everyone who doesn't understand how old she is. Silas Merrick, transformed in the specific, undramatic way that real transformation always happens, slowly, over years, through the practice of small actions rather than a single revelatory moment, does his wood carving in the studio behind the gallery. His pieces have a quality that people struggle to name. They are technically skilled, but the quality people respond to is something in the intent behind them, some evidence of having been made by hands that understand what it means to give something back. Gus has been gone for 6 years, which Maya still cannot say without something specific happening in her chest. There is a painting of him in the gallery, Gus on the beach, the winter light behind him, his ears catching the wind, his attention aimed at something off canvas that will never be revealed, and people stop in front of it with a frequency that has nothing to do with technical appreciation and everything to do with recognition. The young woman comes on a Tuesday afternoon in July, when the light is at its particular high summer clarity, the kind of light that makes everything cast a strong shadow and reveals the texture of things. She is perhaps 17, with the specific look of someone who is holding herself very carefully because she is afraid of what will happen if she stops. Maya recognizes this immediately, the way you recognize a thing you have been. Your work, the young woman says. It helped me through something. I wanted to say that. A pause. I don't know how to explain it, exactly. I kept coming back to it. The Sea Glass series. The way the pieces are broken, and then not broken, but different. Not repaired. Transformed. Maya looks at her for a moment. She is thinking about 4 years old on the beach. About a piece of cold glass in a small fist. About her mother's voice saying, "The sea takes what's broken and makes it beautiful." "Are you doing okay?" she asks. The young woman's careful composure wavers slightly, just at the edges. Just for a moment. "I'm working on it." That's the right answer, Maya says. She means it without qualification. They talk for a while, not about what happened to the young woman, which is hers and doesn't need to be given over to explanation, but about art, and about the island, and about the way the Sea Glass series came to be, not from a plan but from a winter of studio work during which Maya was processing something she couldn't have put into words yet, and the paintings were how she found out what it was. Pain has information in it, Maya says. If you go through it rather than around it, and I know that sounds terrible, and it really is, but if you go through it, you come out knowing something you didn't know before. Something true about yourself. She pauses. It's not worth it in the sense of being a fair trade. It's worth it in the sense of being what you have. The young woman nods. She is writing something down in a small notebook. A reflex that Maya recognizes, the reflex of someone who saves things. One more thing, Maya says, as the young woman turns to go. She goes to the storage room and comes back with a piece of sea glass. Cobalt blue. Smooth as water. Found on South Beach, she thinks, about 20 years ago, though she can't be certain. She places it in the young woman's palm. The sea takes what's broken, she says, and makes it beautiful. That's what the sea does. It's also what we do, if we let ourselves The young woman looks at the glass for a long moment. Then she closes her fist around it, gently, the way you hold something you intend to keep. The late afternoon light comes through the gallery windows and falls across the paintings, across the tide pools and the sea glass and the lighthouse studies and the portrait of a dog with his ears in the wind. And everything it touches holds its shape and its shadow in equal measure, whole and particular and entirely itself. Outside, the sea continues. It has been doing this for a very long time. It will continue after all of them. It takes the broken things and it turns and it turns and it turns them, and it does not hurry, and it does not stop. The end?